We are very happy this morning to be joined by Congressman Pete Stauber and Ms. Quinn Nystrom, the two candidates for U.S. Representative from the 8th District. I'd like to thank my colleagues at all four chambers of commerce in Hibbing, Chisholm, Virginia, and Grand Rapids for helping to sponsor this morning. And to Pastor Dan Erickson, Joni Dahl, and Sandy Karnowski for help formulating the questions. We hope you won't jump up screaming and crying after you hear the questions. They are tough ones, but we tried to be complete in covering all basic topics. What we're going to do is give you 2 minutes each for an opening, then go to the questions, 2 minutes for close, and I think we're going to save as much time at the end as we can for rebuttals. We thought about doing this for each question. We thought that kind of eats up some time. So we'll save some time at the end. If you have anything you want to go back to, any questions you want me to repeat, anything you'd like to add that you haven't added in your closing related to the questions, we thought this would probably be the best way to do things. I'm going to vary the order. I'll ask the questions of one candidate first, and then the next question will go to the next candidate. So no one will really have an advantage. You'll have 2 minutes for each question to think about your response as someone else is answering. So let's get going here. Congressman, would you like to start with the opening?
Sure. Thank you very much, Steve. And I want to thank the chambers of Grand Rapids, Hibbing, Chisholm, and Laurentian for hosting this virtual debate this morning. And it's great to be up in Hibbing. And I also want to welcome my opponent, Quinn, for being here as well. You know, if we look, if we talk about where we were just 7 months ago, the economy was churning, all-time high. Optimism for small business was rising. Wages were rising. We're bringing manufacturing back to this country. And then the pandemic struck. The pandemic came to our shores through no fault of our own. And Governor Walz shut down our businesses, our schools, and even our places of worship. But I'm here to tell you that the Great American Comeback has started. And it starts right here on the Iron Range. The Iron Range is going to play a strategic and important part in that Great American Comeback. You know, under the Obama-Biden years, 8 years of steel dumping into this country. And the Chinese Communist Party had one thing in mind, and that was to shut down the Iron Range for good. And this president and I are fighting to keep the Iron Range open. The president put forth the 232 steel tariffs that saved the Iron Range and kept the Iron Range open. We want to be able to expand mining into copper nickel mining. We have the ability to do that on the Iron Range, and we're open for business. Strategically, the Iron Range is going to set us up our national security interests for our supply chain deficiencies in the copper, nickel, the gold, the platinum, palladium, zinc, cobalt. And we could do that safely and with the highest environmental standards. So I'm looking forward to our conversation this morning, and I think you'll see a stark difference between my opponent and myself. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Congressman. Ms. Nystrom?
Thank you so much as well to the 4 area Chamber of Commerces for hosting this debate this morning. Like Congressman Stauber, I'm looking forward to the discussion that we have today. My name is Quinn Nystrom. I was born and raised and still live in Baxter today. I'm a 4th generation of Crow Wing County. I proudly served on the Baxter City Council for 4 years. And while I was on there, we worked on increasing infrastructure projects, building out our roads, other infrastructure. I worked on the sex trafficking task force to combat that along with our police chief. I worked on our community behavioral health hospital and our Parks and Trails board to build that out even further in our community. I also was recently appointed by the governor to continue serving on the Minnesota Council on Disabilities. My background for the last 18 years is fighting for affordable and accessible healthcare on the state and the federal level. It's a passion of mine and something that I've worked tirelessly on. Those travels brought me to meet with Congressman Stauber last spring in his office. There, I asked him if he would fight to lower the cost of prescription drugs, if he would protect people with pre-existing conditions as he had promised on his campaign, and if he would hold a healthcare roundtable back in our district and hear from the people who desperately are in need of financial help with their healthcare. He promised me that he would do all those things, and I thought we had a great meeting. Unfortunately, afterwards, I saw by his voting record that he didn't keep those promises and that he didn't host this healthcare roundtable, even though I had followed up with his office. I'm running for Congress because I believe we need a representative who's going to listen to the people, who's going to represent them, who's going to bring these pocketbook issues to DC when they vote. I look forward to the discussion today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And let's start with the first question. Ms. Nystrom, we'll give this one to you first. Should the federal government take a role in expanding high-speed internet service in rural areas? And how do you propose to bridge the digital divide to improve broadband access in rural areas?
Great question. So, this was an issue that I was talking about right when I announced my campaign back in October, that we are in desperate need here, especially in the 8th district, to expand rural broadband internet. But then this pandemic hit, and this has further exacerbated the issue. I talked to a teacher in Princeton who said, because of the distance learning that they've had to do, that students who already had, a wide educational disparity, that's even growing deeper, because even though the school is giving them hotspots, if you don't get cell service, these hotspots don't really work that well. And so those students are having to just do paper copies of their schoolwork. I've also talked to farmers, who are business owners and they want to sell their products online, but because they don't have expansion of rural broadband internet, they don't have those opportunities. Or for people who want to start small businesses, but want to live out here in greater Minnesota. We have a great need for this. And so I would be in favor of passing a large infrastructure bill, so that we could expand here in greater Minnesota, because it's something where, just 10 minutes from me, they don't have good access. And to live in 2020, we must be able to expand that for everybody in greater Minnesota.
Thank you. Congressman Stauber?
Thank you for the question. And the internet question and the expansion of the broadband internet has been going on for some time. This pandemic has opened up the doors and showed the digital divide. In Minnesota's 8th Congressional District, we need to invest in federal infrastructure. And I've been on some bills, supported some bills, the Upton-Clyburn bill. That's going to bring $1.44 billion of infrastructure investment into the state of Minnesota. In fact, the state of Minnesota is actually going to get more over 10 years than the state of Michigan. It's important that during this pandemic, the school kids that have to go to a hot spot where a school bus is stationed so they can download their homework and get their new assignments. That's unacceptable to me. And I think the bottom line is the federal government does have a role. And I want to make a statement that I'm going to attribute to Neil Kashkari from the Federal Reserve when I was talking to him about it. At some point in the history of this country, the federal government made the commitment that every mailbox mattered. Let's bring that philosophy to every home matters across this great nation. It seems that rural America is always forgotten or isn't part of the equation. I went to a broadband committee hearing where a quote expert was there. And for 45 minutes, they never talked about just broadening and bringing broadband to rural America. And finally, I raised my hand. I've been here for 45 minutes. You haven't talked about bringing broadband to rural America. We matter just as much. And I tell people this, Northern Minnesota, greater America matters just as much as St. Paul, Minneapolis, New York, Dallas, or Houston. We and our kids and our small businesses matter too. And I'm on the Contracting and Infrastructure Committee, and I held a broadband meeting in Scandia, Minnesota with my colleague Jared Golden on a Maine. And then I went to his district and we had a broadband hearing in upstate Maine. The same concerns that are in upstate Maine are in greater Minnesota. We need access. It's going to bring economic development to rural America. We're going to see people actually moving to rural America in greater Minnesota because of our quality of life, as long as they have access to high-speed, reliable broadband.
Thank you. Congressman Stauber will give you this one first this time. Do you see accessibility to affordable quality childcare as a workforce issue? And what ways can the federal government help provide improved access to quality childcare?
You know, Steve, this follows in lines of your first question. In greater Minnesota, the 8th district, we're a childcare desert. That's important for working families to have that quality level of childcare. And what I've done in the Small Business Administration is I've authored legislation that allows nonprofit childcare centers to have access to small business administrative loans to help them gain access so they can open up their centers in rural America. We are seeing the deficiencies in our childcare centers, and it's continuing. And what I want to do is I want to be able to allow the investment and the access to capital. So those that want to get into childcare, which is extremely important, not only private, but the non-public, but the private sector childcare providers have that ability too. The childcare we're seeing right now is one of the highest issues in greater Minnesota. And that's why I'm committed to ensure that the access to capital is there so we can open up more childcare facilities so those working mom and dads can feel comfortable.
Thank you. Ms. Nystrom, same question.
This is a topic that I've talked to, with girlfriends for years of mine here in greater Minnesota. I have a friend who, before she even got pregnant, she was looking for daycares so that she could get her child on a waiting list. This is a huge issue, and it's tied directly to our economy here in greater Minnesota. If we can't work harder to provide for more child care centers, regardless if that's public or private, if we can offer them federal or state assistance, we have to give them opportunities to thrive, as small business owners. Because if we don't have that access to good child care facilities that are safe, then, our men and women of this district can't go and work. And we know that we have a job shortage. And so we need to look at having childcare that's accessible and affordable, right? Because I think that's the other big key thing here is making sure that childcare is affordable for working families. So that if a mother and father both want to work or one or the other, that they have that opportunity. But we need to have this conversation right alongside the other conversations that we have about how to keep our economy up and thriving in the 8th district.
Thank you. Ms. Nystrom, I'll give you this one first of all. Do you support reforms to address racial discrimination by law enforcement officers? And if so, please list specific initiatives you would support.
So I think, what we've seen here in our country, right? The murder of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, those have been tragic. And we must do something as a country to address that so that that does not continue. When I served on the Baxter City Council, I was proud to work with our police chief and our whole law enforcement there to work on a lot of different initiatives across our municipality. And I was proud of that work. But the truth is, we still are seeing these, murders take place. And so what I'm in favor of is banning chokeholds, of ensuring that there are no-knock warrants, right? That those are banned, making sure that we're looking at funding restorative justice initiatives. I am not in favor of defunding the police at all. I believe that we have to look at where our funding is. We also need to look at what responsibilities are we putting for police officers. Also knowing, I know here in Crow Wing County, we have, and we're not unique, we have a lot of mental health crises that are happening around, and we don't even have the amount of beds to put people in to get the right treatment. So we need to evaluate all those things to make sure that people are being properly addressed no matter what crisis situation they're in.
Thank you. Congressman Stauber, the same question.
Steve, thanks for the question. That's right in my wheelhouse. You know, as a police officer for 23 years, I held many positions at the Duluth Police Department, and I know, and I've said this on public and national television, nobody dislikes a bad cop more than a good cop. And you talk about enhancing and putting forth best practices within the police departments. That's exactly what the Justice Act does. Senator Tim Scott and I wrote that Justice Act together. He wrote it from his perspective as a Black male growing up in South Carolina, and I wrote it as a police officer in Minnesota. That Justice Act, there's transparency, accountability, and performance measures in it. And in fact, there's some of the things in this Justice Act, Steve, that should have been implemented years ago. And so my goal, and I'm working with the Problem Solvers Caucus right now, because the Senate doesn't have enough votes to even bring it up on the floor for discussion. But the bottom line is best practices. We're talking about community policing, which is a philosophy that you don't police your community, you police with your community. It builds long-lasting and trusting relationships. That's exactly what I brought to the Duluth Police Department in over 2 decades. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of education, but it's worth it. And the investment that the Justice Act brings to community policing and departments across the nation is millions and millions of dollars. In fact, almost $5 billion overall. So these departments can bring the best practices to the citizens that they serve, keep them safe, keep their community safe. Crime prevention, education. These are things that I did in the Duluth Police Department, and I really feel I'm an expert. I've told people I'm an expert in 2 things. I played professional hockey, and I helped build one of the best community policing departments in the state of Minnesota, in the 3rd largest police department, the Duluth Police Department.
Thank you. Congressman Stauber will give you this one first. Tariffs in the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, the one that replaced NAFTA, were enacted to bolster domestic industry and protect pricing from foreign intervention. Changes unintentionally reduce competitive advantage for American firms selling to global markets. What changes can we make to protect domestic manufacturing and promote global competitiveness?
Well, first off, Steve, we know that the American miner, farmer, manufacturer, small business man or woman can compete with anybody in the world on a level and fair playing field. And that's what this administration is trying to do. We know that the bottom line is when we give the opportunity for the American worker to succeed, they do. And the tariffs are not meant to punish. The tariffs are meant to make it fair. Look at the USMCA that I helped support and get through Congress. I was there when the president signed that. You know, the countries of Mexico and Canada, they're not our enemies. In fact, they're our best trading partners. 70% of what we manufacture and make in this country goes to those 2 countries. And it's important that that trade agreement was incorporated because NAFTA had some bad stuff in there. It didn't treat, for instance, our farmers the way they should have. It didn't treat our manufacturers the way they should. So we know when we give a level and fair playing field, we can compete with anybody in the world, and that's the goal of making sure protecting our industries in a fair way, knowing full well that we are in a global economy.
Ms. Nystrom?
Absolutely. So I think this was, a great first step. It's important, right, that we are strengthening our laws to make sure that, we're not getting taken advantage of as a country, that we are putting legislation forth to have people buy American. So I think these were all great first steps. I talked to a farmer in the southeastern part of our district who was telling me that one problem that they still have is that they'll have their semi-loader, loaded up, ready to go for early next morning to go out. And our president will send out a tweet in the middle of the night about ongoing trade wars, and that by the time they wake up in the morning, the price of that semi-loader has just been slashed. And so I believe what we also need as a country is to have stability from the leader at the top, to make sure that these farmers' income is not put any more in damage. We know that their profits have gone down and down these last several years. And so anything we can do to strengthen that, to strengthen our American manufacturers, we need to do.
Thank you. This question for Ms. Nystrom first. The COVID pandemic will leave the nation with a massive budget deficit. How should Congress act to deal with this deficit?
The COVID pandemic, has been devastating for so many Americans. We have over 200,000 people that have lost their lives to this. The effects are far-reaching. What we need to do to address this is we need to look at where the tax breaks we're giving. My opponent supported these $1 billion of tax breaks for the ultra wealthy, the top 1%, for our large corporations. I don't think it's fair that we live in a country where a company like Eli Lilly pays $0 in federal taxes, which is a lot less than most working families in this country. I also don't believe we should live in a country where President Trump, who's a billionaire, only pays $750 a year in his income taxes. We need to make sure that our tax system is fair and equitable for all people, and that our middle class is not being hit particularly hard. That's one of the ways that I think we can get out of this massive deficit that we've had to get in because of having to respond to this coronavirus. Because if we do not get a better handle on it, our economy will never get back up and going and thriving once again.
Thank you. Congressman Stauber, same question.
Thank you, Steve. It's interesting. My opponent talks about raising taxes, and she raised them while she was a city councilor in Baxter. So, the COVID pandemic came through our shores to no fault of our own, and we had to deal with it as a nation. We shut down and we stopped the business of the country for a couple of weeks to try to figure out what was happening, what it was going to be like, and what the effects were. And I was proud to be in Congress working on both sides of the aisle to make sure that the initial three pieces of legislation that were so beneficial to the country, including PPP, which saved 51 million jobs and almost 11.4 million small businesses across this nation. And you notice we worked in a bipartisan fashion. We worked actually at the speed of the private sector, which was needed at the time. And I'm proud of what Congress has done. I'm proud of the PPP Flexibility Act that once we passed the PPP program, we realized there were some deficiencies in that. And what we did is listen to the small businessmen and women across this nation who are the engine of our economy. If you don't believe small businesses are the engine of our economy, just look what happened in the pandemic. We lost and shut down businesses for a period of time. And it was the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, that saved these businesses, give them the opportunity to get through this pandemic as whole as they can and where they were prior to. So I'm looking forward to continuing working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, because we're not through this pandemic yet. We're going through it, and we will come out of this as one nation. We will come out of this, Steve, this pandemic stronger, more self-reliant, and more resilient than ever before because of what we learned. We're going to look at our after action, what we did well, what we can do better. And I've sponsored legislation. It's called the One Health Act, which talks about all government agencies have a unified response and a unified approach if we ever receive, or if this country ever inquires a pandemic like this before. So there's consistent response from the top all the way down to the lowest level of governments to make sure that the health and safety is paramount and the #1 priority.
Thank you. Congressman Stauber, this one to you first. St. Louis County's unemployment rate is currently 8.6%, and businesses still struggle with COVID-19 caused challenges. What measures should be included in new legislation to help St. Louis County businesses and residents?
Well, I think one of the things we're doing right now is working on that extension of the PPP and targeted approach, and also support our way of life, also support our mining industry, support iron ore mining and the expansion thereof, support the copper nickel mining. We're on the cusp of a blue collar middle class boom. Support Enbridge Line 3. As we come through this pandemic, these jobs are going to be needed. And they're not only going to help us through the pandemic, they're going to help us strategically with our national security interests. Steelmaking is a national security issue. And I will not let anybody diminish that capacity. I will fight for our way of life at every intersection. And there are people in Congress, including supporters of my opponent, that want to stop our way of life. With every fiber in my body, I will protect the economy on the Iron Range.
Thank you. Ms. Nystrom, the same question.
I want to first say, in response to Congressman Stauber's previous answer, he says that I raise taxes, but he forgets to say that he raised taxes by over 18% when he was on the St. Louis County Board. So need people be reminded of that. Now, to answer this question, this pandemic needs to be taken seriously. We're not going to get our economy back up and thriving until people take this seriously. We absolutely need more testing. We need quicker turnaround on our testing. Our healthcare systems in our communities are still having to ration tests. We need more antibody tracing. We need access to a safe vaccine. And once that vaccine comes out, it needs to not only be safe, but it needs to be accessible and affordable for all Americans, which the HHS secretary has not assured Congress yet. You know, the other thing that we need is for our elected officials to take this seriously by wearing masks. I've seen my opponent walking around without masks on in 200 plus packed ballrooms. You know, shame on you. Unless we take this seriously and lead by example, we can't get our economy back up and running. We have to listen to the recommendation of the CDC director who said, look, this mask is more effective than even when a vaccine comes out. So we have to be listening to the CDC, the experts, the public health experts, and taking this coronavirus seriously. Otherwise, small businesses like mine and others along Main Street are going to continue to struggle.
Thank you. Joni Dahl, I know, is sitting there, and she may be able to add something to this next question. I think we might have rewritten it a bit differently, but I'll go ahead with it anyway. To you first, Ms. Nystrom. 2020 saw Keewatin taconite idled, and Hibbing taconite is nearing the end of its mine life. If elected or re-elected, how would you help these mine operations and their over 1,000 employees?
Yeah, so I think, you know, we've seen this last year that 50% of our iron ore miners have been laid off. A lot of that due to the pandemic, right, which is devastating. My father-in-law worked at HIBTAC for over 3 decades. He came from EBTAC. And so, you know, we sit around the dinner table and we talk about, you know, the miners who got let go, where if they worked less than 2 years, you know, they were not given any health benefits or a severance package. They are really struggling. We have to do everything we can to get these industries, you know, back up and running. And I think a big component of that is combating this coronavirus to make sure, you know, that people are healthy, that they feel all right going to work again, that people, you know, like the over 200,000 that have died in this country, it's not going to happen at such a rapid pace like it has. And we need to stand with our miners. We also need to make sure that we are supporting our unions so that these continue to be good paying jobs in our mines. So I will do everything I can to commit myself to the 8th District to make sure that we can get these mining operations back in full operation.
Congressman Stauber, the same question.
Well, thank you very much. You know, to fight for our way of life and fight for our miners and their families, one of the things, one of the most important things you have to do is number one, support it, and number two, put legislation that allows the mining to grow. You know, I'm fighting right now with a colleague of mine out of St. Paul that has made it her #1 issue is to ban mining on the Iron Range. And that colleague supports my opponent. The bottom line is this legislation, we have to encourage mining growth. We have to encourage the investment. And we have to encourage these 3 words, made in America. The steel that this government uses for the infrastructure development and other metals should be made in America. That's going to keep our miners mining the iron ore, which, by the way, makes 85% of this country's steel right here on the Iron Range. And we can invest and add copper nickel mining to that, help with the supply chain. You know, my opponent talks as if she supports mining. The union members know who supports them. I'm supported by the Teamsters, the iron workers, the carpenters, the pipe fitters, and so many others that are part of this blue collar, middle wage economy here on the Iron Range. You know, mining is the heartbeat of the Iron Range. And if you shut that down, you shut the entire state down. It is critically important for not only strategically for the Iron Range of Minnesota, but our national security. You know, when those taconite pellets are made here and they're shipped down to the ore docks in Duluth and go on the Lakers. I was privileged last year to ride on the Roger M. Blau going across Lake Superior because we were supporting the industry and supporting the investment in the new Soo Locks. I was on the deck of the Roger Blau in the middle of Lake Superior. I couldn't see either shore. Myself and General Jack Bergman, the member of Congress from Northern Michigan. And those diesel engines, I could hear those diesel engines. And I knew that ship, that Laker, was filled with the blood, sweat, and tears of the men and women who work in the mines. It actually gives me a lump in my throat right now to talk about it. This is who we are. Mining is our past, our present, and our future. And there will be nobody stronger for fighting for our mines than Pete Stauber.
Thank you, Congressman. This one to Congressman Stauber first. I suspect you answered part of this already, but we'll give you another go at it. Do you support the Twin Metals project, and how do you intend to advocate for or oppose this project?
You know, the 14 days, Steve, 14 days before the Obama administration left office, they put a mining ban on, purely partisan and political. They didn't even allow the science. They didn't even allow the mine plan to be put forth. They stopped it before it even went. And President Trump reversed that. President Trump and I are fighting for the process to continue. We can mine safely using the best environmental standards and the best labor standards. These are additional union jobs that my opponent doesn't support. This can be a strategic national security. We're seeing the copper, nickel, and that we talked about the palladium, platinum, gold, zinc, cobalt. We're seeing the deficiency in that. We are purchasing these minerals from foreign adversaries that don't have our best interests at heart. I toured the Lockheed Martin plant in Fort Worth, Texas. They make the F-35. They told me if certain countries stop selling them their minerals, not only rare earth, but critical minerals that we can mine here, their production was shut down. The F-35, the most survivable, lethal fighter that we can give our men and women, would be shut down. We have to own our dependency. We have to have our lives and our livelihood, our national security has to be in our own hands. We should not rely on foreign adversaries or nations that don't have our best interests at heart.
Ms. Nystrom, same question.
You know, just how I approached my job as a city council member, I believe it's about looking at any individual project that comes in front of you and doing your due diligence to review that for several different factors. I have continued to say I'm not against copper nickel mining. What I do is I look at every single individual project with the information that's presented to me. When I announced that I was running for office, I went and met with the people at Twin Metals to learn about the project. I met with business owners. I met with environmental groups. I met with all the stakeholders that are represented here in the 8th District, which I believe, as the next Congresswoman for this district, you must do. I'm not willing to be just a rubber stamp on a project. And so what I said to Twin Metals and what I've said consistently to people is I don't feel comfortable giving a green light to a project where a 60+ page US forestry report has been completely blacked out and redacted. You know, I would never have approved a project like that for the Baxter City Council if any project would have had a blacked out report. You know, people here in our state, all across the state, all across the country, all across the world, the BWCA is beloved. And so if there's any proposed mining project around there, we have to do our due diligence to make sure that it can be done in an environmentally safe way.
Thank you.
Steve?
Yes, sir.
This is so critical. I'm going to ask to respond to this. This is our way of life. This is the engine of our economy. And I would ask if I could have a response.
Yes, and I'll give Ms. Nystrom one as well.
Thank you. It's interesting that my opponent talks about her support for mining. Yet the DFL, Minnesota DFL Environmental Caucus, endorsed her because, in quotes, she cannot support Polymet or Twin Metals. In fact, just last month, when the DFL party of Minnesota adopted and unanimously passed a mining ban, my opponent sat silent. Crickets from Quinn. That's unacceptable. The Iron Range knows that I'm a fighter for them. We know that we can mine these minerals safely and using the best labor standards in the world.
Ms. Nystrom, response?
You know, this is why people are sick of Washington politicians. You know, Congressman Stauber wants to quote this line from a press release, but he cuts half the sentence off. I did say I would not support Polymet or Twin Metals if it cannot be done in a proven environmentally safe way. That's true. I believe that we have to look at the pros and cons for any project, if that's mining, if that's a retail development, if that's fill in the blank. I believe I'm being elected to make sure to look at all sides. And again, I have said, I'm not against copper nickel mining. This is a brand new way of mining for this district. And so we must do everything in our powers to look at everything. And to me, I think on a very pragmatic level, why wouldn't we be able to review the US forestry report?
Thank you both. Ms. Nystrom, this one to you first. If elected, what are the 3 most important things you want to accomplish in the 117th Congress that will impact businesses of northeastern Minnesota?
Number one, we absolutely have to get this pandemic under control. We have to make sure that there is more testing. We have to make sure that there's quicker turnaround, and when this vaccine comes out, that it's going to be affordable and accessible. Number 2, we have to fight like hell to lower the cost of prescription drugs and healthcare. You know, as a small business owner myself, I know the struggle it is to have to afford health insurance off the marketplace. You know, it's actually what led me to get married early, much earlier than I thought, because my small business took a massive hit this year because of the pandemic. But I know that not everybody just has the luxury of having a fiance that they can marry sooner in order to get better health benefits. You know, we live in the most prosperous country in the world, and we are still having that struggle where people can't afford it. They're still not covered. Even if they are covered, the deductible is too high, the max out of pocket is too high. You know, this is where my opponent and I really differ. You know, I would fight on day one to get the cost of prescription drugs lowered. He, on the other hand, voted 5 times not to lower the cost of healthcare in office. The third and the last, I would say, to get our businesses back up and running, we absolutely need to put money into an infrastructure bill to further expand rural broadband internet. So not just for our businesses, but for our schools, but for business owners who want to expand their businesses, who again, our farmers are wanting to be more and more inventive and sell online. We absolutely have to have that available for businesses to thrive.
Congressman Stauber.
Well, thank you very much. We're not through the pandemic yet. We have to move through the pandemic in a safe and responsible way, opening up our economy in those areas that we can. And already we're seeing that we've created, 10.3 million jobs already. And when we can open up responsibly, it is about the jobs and the economy, and that's why I support the expansion of iron ore mining, copper nickel mining, polymet and twin metals, and of course, Enbridge Line 3 replacement. These are jobs that are ready to go. These are, like I say, good blue collar, middle class union jobs that thrive, that make up the Iron Range in northern Minnesota. And when we talk about the jobs, there's ancillary jobs not only on the range but in the city of Duluth. There's businesses, Steve, in the city of Duluth that are solely dependent on a strong economy on the Iron Range, a strong mining industry. We can't forget that. Mining is we talked about mining is our past, our present, and our future. And you know what? As we go through this pandemic and as we watched the riots, the Minneapolis riots, we also have to stand with law enforcement. I wore the uniform for over 2 decades as a law enforcement officer. I still have friends in the profession. Law enforcement is an honorable and noble profession, and we have to have the backs of the men and women who keep our streets and communities safe. This president has the backs of law enforcement, and this member of Congress has the backs of law enforcement. They are targeted right now. We have to stop the war on cops. And I'm standing front and center on that. In fact, that's why the House of Representatives asked me to lead the Justice Act. There's very few, but a handful of people in the House of Representatives that have ever worn the local uniform, and I am one of them.
Thank you. This question first for Congressman Stauber. Whoever is elected this fall will probably represent the most diverse congressional district in Minnesota. How do you balance the different economic interests of District 8 centered around natural resources, including agriculture, mining, timber, and tourism?
Well, I think that you have to represent all the interests. In fact, if we talk about agriculture this afternoon, right after this debate, I'm heading to the southwestern part of the district. I brought the EPA administrator to the western part of this district to talk to farmers and to listen to farmers firsthand how the EPA can help grow the farming industry. I stand with our timber industry. We look at the potential for biofuels. I am working with the EPA. I'm trying to get non-merchantable timber to be able to be used as biofuel, which will clean our forest floors up, which will help with the timber industry and help with our paper industry. And we have the options and the opportunities and the responsibilities that we have in this diverse economy are great. And we are a natural resource-based economy. We talked about our iron mining, the potential for copper nickel right around the corner. And that's exactly why less than 2 months ago, my colleagues unanimously voted to put me on the Natural Resources Committee because they know that I will fight for our timber industry. I will fight for our mining industry. And I will fight for clean water like I have with the Great Lakes Restorative Initiative. My efforts, along with the Great Lakes Caucus efforts, was we were able to get $174 million more for the Great Lakes cleanup, the areas of concern, for instance, in the Duluth Harbor. And I'm proud of that, and I look forward to continuing that fight.
Ms. Nystrom, same question.
We do have a really diverse district. It's also geographically quite large. You know, we go all the way south to Cambridge, North Branch, Princeton, and we go all the way north to the Canadian border. We represent a lot of different economies, a lot of different economic interests. And I think it's important, as the next member to represent this district, that we are listening to all those industries, that we're taking equal time. We have such wonderful and excellent natural resources in this district, and we have to make sure that we're having roundtables, that we're listening to those different industries across this district, and then going back to DC and making sure that we're fighting for them, that we're elevating their voices to make sure that their needs are being met. In this pandemic, talking to so many people around this district, this pandemic has hit them very hard. And again, I think to get these, back up and running, we have to have a better handling of the coronavirus so that these industries can once again thrive, be fully rebooted, that our unemployment rate will lower. And that's what we need to do. We need to work in a collaborative fashion from the federal, state, and our local governments to make sure that they all thrive once again.
Thank you. This question for Ms. Nystrom first. Increasing demand for mental health and substance abuse services relies upon traditional and innovative funding approaches. What can Congress do to increase investment from both public and private sources for these areas?
That's such an excellent question. When I served on the city council, I was our council liaison for our community behavioral health hospital. And, we had such a great need for people who were struggling with mental illness to get them the proper treatment, the proper care. But at the time when I served on the council, we didn't even have enough state funding to be able to have maximum capacity at this, great facility that we had to care for people. We have to make sure and make a commitment from the federal government that we will see mental illness just like we see any other type of physical ailment. I always say I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at a young age. My pancreas puttered out, right? Mental illness is no different. I think we have to continue evolving in our views and see that, 1 in 4 people are struggling with a mental illness. We need to make sure that they are getting the proper treatment. We know that people are struggling with alcoholism, with addiction. A friend of mine, her daughter died sadly from the opioid crisis. And she said on the federal level, the best thing we can do is make sure that health insurance companies are providing treatment when people are ready to get treatment. Because so often we see that when people are ready to get the treatment, nor it be mental illness, alcoholism, opioid addiction, the health insurance company will come in and say, nope, you're not sick enough, we're not going to pay for this. We have to do better as a federal government to make sure that people are getting the proper health care and that it's affordable so that they can combat this.
Thank you, Congressman Stauber.
Great question, Stephen. Timely as well. For 23 years as a police officer, I saw the negative effects of mental health. I saw it devastate individuals, I saw it devastate communities, and I saw it devastate families. When I was on the St. Louis County Board, I helped lead the initiative to pay for a mental health, a social worker that was keen in mental health issues to be with the Duluth Police Department, to be there on scene. And it was a successful program. In fact, many people are copying it, not only in Minnesota, but across the nation. We led that effort into making sure that we put best practices forward. When I talk about best practices forward, that's getting that social worker to deal and help deal with those people in crises. And when a person is in crisis, when they ask for help, that door needs to be open now. We have to allow public-private partnerships to develop across not only Minnesota, across this nation, to be able to help people that are going through crisis. And we have to stop the stigma that people put on folks that are going through a crisis. We need to help them. We need to get them the professional help so they can get back and become productive members of society. You know, I saw firsthand as a police officer when we would bring somebody in for a mental health evaluation or somebody who was experiencing a crisis. And they would sit in our emergency rooms for 3 or 4 days because there wasn't a mental health bed open for them. That is unacceptable. Those people and those families deserve immediate attention, and the investment into the mental health arena, the investment, the public-private investment is going to help relieve those emergency rooms from being stacked up for people who are in crisis. They need help, they need our support, and the stigma on mental health has to stop.
Thank you. My boss there, Joni, tells me we have time for one more question, so I will give this one to Ms. Nystrom first off. With American manufacturing facing shortages of skilled labor, how should the federal programs be changed to best train people for jobs in existing and emerging employment paths?
It's a great and timely question. You know, I know here in the Brainerd Lakes area, there's been a lot of effort put here with our local community college, Central Lakes College, right, to really make sure that we're able to equip students who want to go into these industries, you know, where the jobs are open, they're good paying jobs, that we have the training facilities, that we're encouraging students. You know, with public education funding being cut every year, you know, we saw at our local high school, we had a great manufacturing program, and then it got cut because there were so many cuts. You know, these schools have literally gone to the bare bones. And so now we see our high school, our community college, also the local chamber of commerce and the business community working together to talk to high school students about these great career opportunities. On the federal government, I think we need to be creative about looking at these different types of public and private partnerships that we can do to encourage young students. You know, that not everybody's path needs to be a 4-year college education. You know, what people need is a good paying job with good benefits when they get out of school. They get off their parents' health insurance. And these offer that promise, you know, and good sustainable jobs. And so I think we need to continue to do that. We need to make sure that we continue on the federal level to fund these types of apprentice programs, these types of programs that we have at local community colleges and also in communities all across the 8th Congressional District.
Thank you. Congressman Stauber, same question.
You know, Steve, when I was growing up and I graduated from Duluth-Denfeld, there was a lot of push to go get your 4-year degree. That was the theme back then. We're seeing the deficiency in the workforce because of that, in those blue-collar, middle-class jobs. And that's why we need to invest in industrial arts in our schools. I got to tour several schools, including Hibbing, Grand Rapids, and Little Falls, their industrial arts program. They have welding, a sheet metal, electricity, auto mechanics, and the such. We need to promote those jobs. We need to meet those students where they want to go. You know, the next student might be the best welder, might be the best sheet metal worker, might be the best carpenter. We never know until we offer them the experience. And we need those workers. And that's why the investment, and that's why I'm pushing the investment in Congress to make sure that we have the money and resources so our local school districts can invest in the industrial arts. And one of the ways I'm doing that, Steve, is I'm promoting and put the bill forward with my colleague, my Democratic colleague, Angie Craig from Southern Minnesota, the IDEA Act. That's where we're putting forth 40% for the special education funding. We are making sure that the federal government lives up to their promise on special education. In some districts, they only are paying, the federal government is only paying 8, 9, 10%, when they promised every school district in the nation that they would pay 40%. That frees up the money so those local schools can invest in these industrial arts and career technical professions. And so that's one of the ways we can do that, and that's one of the ways I'm fighting for, because once we get the federal government to pay for 40% of the special education, which they promised, we can then invest in the industrial arts. These are good paying jobs that are deficient right now. And you'll see, and that's why I'm supporting Department of Labor registered apprenticeship programs. These are quality apprenticeship programs, and the investment made by our government is going to pay off greatly in the future.
Thank you. Well, it is time for closings, and thank you both for participating today. Ms. Nystrom, Congressman Stauber got the first opening. You get the first closing.
Thank you so much for having us today, for having this discussion. I think it's really important that we have this. I'm running for Congress because I see what a healthcare crisis we have in this country. I see the different needs that need to be met with public education funding, with rural broadband, with getting our economy back up and running. The truth is, my opponent talks about our way of life, and I'm not quite sure what that means, because his way of life is making over $170,000 a year and having great health insurance, when most of us in this district are struggling to pay our bills, to put groceries on the table, to afford our prescription medications, or even Cook County, who now no longer even has a pharmacy open. As a non-elected official, I have worked for 18 years to fight to get legislation passed. Just here recently, I worked with a split legislature here in Minnesota to help spearhead the passage of the Alex Smith law, as well as step therapy legislation, so that doctors are the ones who are making medication recommendations for patients, not health insurance companies. We need to have leaders who are going to work across the aisle, find results, not people who are going to vote against lowering the cost of health care. What we need in this country more than ever is leaders who are going to listen to people, not corporations. They're going to elevate the voices of those who are most in need, the people who've been speaking and yelling for years, but their voices have just not been elevated or heard. That is the job of the next Congresswoman for this district. And I would be proud to serve and bring my past experience to the job in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for having me today.
Thank you. Congressman Stauber, you're closed.
Thanks, Steve. Thank you, Steve. And I want to thank the Chamber for hosting this debate. And obviously, the people watching can see the stark differences. I'm married to my best friend of 24 years. I have raised 4 children, one with special needs. I'm a small business owner, have been for 31 years. I've been a police officer, a professional hockey player, and I am bringing that experience to Congress. And I'm fighting for our economic drivers right here on the Iron Range. 2 years ago, I sat in the same seat and I told the folks, the voters, that if you vote for me, you will have no bigger champion in Congress than Pete Stauber. And I have delivered. I have fought and will continue to fight against job-killing regulations and anti-mining, anti-jobs groups, which, by the way, support my opponent. I will fight with every fiber in my body to make sure iron ore mining stays strong and expands. I will fight to allow the process of copper nickel mining to go forward, to bring these jobs, to help with energy independence. And I will support projects like Enbridge Line 3 unwaveringly. These are the jobs, the blue-collar, middle-class jobs that we want in the 8th District. I fought for them and will continue to fight for them in Congress and in our community. When the Iron Range asks me to show up, I show up, just like I did in Hibbing this morning for this debate. They know I have their backs. The unions know I have their backs. And in fact, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce knows I have the backs of small businesses because they endorse me, including the National Federation of Independent Businesses. I am proud of my record, and I will continue to fight for our way of life and to unleash the economic engine in Minnesota's 8th Congressional District. My name is Pete Stauber, and I humbly ask for your vote.
Thank you both. I have a question for both of you after Megan kills the recording, but thank you again for participating. We really appreciate your participation today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Quinn, for joining.
Thank you, Congressman Stauber. It was a good discussion.